This is not a party political issue, given the evidence of the shared position that we have with the Welsh Government. This is a devolution-related issue.
Well, with respect, Cabinet Secretary, we're here to discuss the relationship between the Scottish Government and the UK Government, and I'm a bit uncomfortable at constantly quoting the Welsh Government without a Welsh representative here to do that. But if, as you say, it's entirely the fault of the UK Government, they are making incursions into areas which they should not be, and that they are to blame for the failure of legislation. Why is it every time it goes to courts, the court rules that the UK Government is in fact correct, and it's the Scottish Government which is not acting within the constitutional framework?
Well, the simple answer to that is it's a comparison of apples and pears in terms of intergovernmental relations. I mean, the point about the Welsh Government is quite an important one, and if you were... Could
we stick, please, to the question, which is why do the courts, every single time it goes to the courts, why is it that the courts rule that the UK Government is working within the UK constitutional framework, and that it is the Scottish Government and the legislation which it has presented, which is not?
Yeah. So all of the examples that I've given are not ones which are subject to legislation, are not the examples that I've given the committee about the workings or not workings of interministerial government, about meetings not taking place or meetings being rescheduled or papers not being provided and so on and so on. These are not issues which one can legislate for, nor can one take them to court. So that's the why I'm making the point about comparing apples and pears. In terms of the day and daily interaction between the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish government and the UK government, in the areas that I've described, these are specifically not areas which one can raise in a court of law. It is about best practice. And does that best practice work or does it not work? About specific issues of specific court challenges, all of that is in the public realm. None of that is specifically relevant to the evidence that I've been giving today about the workings of the structures of intergovernmental relations. They're not subject to courts. They are subject to goodwill, and unfortunately there hasn't been very much of that.
Would you not concede that if it ends up in court, regardless of the issue, whether it is an apple, a pear or an orange, if it ends up in court, it is because the relationship between the two governments has been unable to resolve it. And when it is resolved in court, it has been consistently the view of the courts that the UK government is acting within the constitutional framework. And specifically on, you mentioned the DRS scheme, and you blamed the UK government for that and described it as a power play. Is it not in fact the case that it wasn't solely the view of the UK government that the scheme could not work properly? It was the view of a great number of major companies, manufacturers, glass distributors, whisky companies, beer companies, that the scheme was unworkable. And it wasn't an objection to glass. It was an objection to the fact that the scheme wouldn't work. And to suggest that that's because devolution isn't working is to overlook the fact that it might just have been bad legislation.
Well, firstly, it's the Scottish Parliament's responsibility to legislate in devolved areas, not any other parliament.
That wasn't my question. So my question was it not simply that you're blaming the relationship for the fact that it was bad legislation?
No, the legislation was passed, and if anybody...
That doesn't make it good. That just makes it passed. It doesn't make it good.
Well, when we're talking about devolution, we are talking about where decisions should be made, whether one agrees with them or not. And I'm perfectly willing to accede that Christine Jardine and I have a different view on whether something was worthwhile proceeding with. In relation to intergovernmental relations and this point, if there were, and this goes back to the point that I made right at the start, I'd far rather be talking not about dispute resolution, but dispute avoidance. Mm-hmm. And it is the case that there's a great many things which one just doesn't hear about, and they don't become matters of great import, because one has been able to deal with them on that official-to-official level, or where one has these structures of being able to get together. And that is my preferred route with dealing with all of these things. if there had been goodwill about being able to deliver such a scheme, then one would have been able to see that far earlier in the process from the UK government, which one did not. And the end of the lesson, as I've already mentioned now a couple of times, is neither Scotland nor the rest of the United Kingdom has a deposit return scheme. So that's a great shame. If one had wished to make things workable or better or deliverable, then one would have done a lot more about it. One didn't do that. Sorry, to be clear, the UK government did not do that.
Can I just, on that point, the Cabinet Secretary assumed he knew my view on the DRS scheme. Can I say he's incorrect about my view on the DRS scheme?
I'm happy to be corrected.
And could I just, one final point about that is that, do you think that the people of Scotland are happy with the fact that they constantly see conflict between the two governments, which ends up in court? And do you think that perhaps, rather than constantly making what the UK government would see as incursions into areas that are not in the devolution settlement, such as external affairs, that perhaps it might be better to take a more conciliatory approach and try and avoid these court cases, and that this cannot entirely be one-sided? As Mr Shanks said, respect goes two ways, so does discussion. Yeah.
So I'm sure one wouldn't want to miss the point that this isn't just a concern for the Scottish Government, that the concerns I've outlined and one can evidence because of the record, which Mark Drakeford has said, and other colleagues in the Welsh Government, the critique that I have been making is shared by the Scottish and Welsh Government. So no doubt, many people in both Scotland and Wales are dismayed about the state of intergovernmental relations. But any fair-minded person with a fair-minded grip of the reality of what is causing the problem will conclude that, unfortunately, it is the UK government that has made it.
All right, we're going to have to move on, sorry.